Welcome aboard to the show, Len. So happy to have you on today. Okay, let me stop and let you respond to that. I'm so excited to talk to you. I just wanted to jump into the question.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ari. Thank you for having me.
Len, you have kids. Tell me how
Yes.
many?
I have 5 daughters.
5 daughters. I mean, I have one daughter and she's 10, and so I'm kind of terrified.
It gets worse. It gets so much worse.
and your kids are quite a bit older than mine. You know what's coming. What is the most terrifying moment that you have had with your kids?
Ooh, that's a toss-up between 2 options.
Is it
One,
the
when they
boyfriends? Is it that?
it's either the boyfriend or trying to teach them how to drive.
Oh my Lord. I got to hear the driving story. I don't think we can talk about security before we touch that.
Let's just say if I had a choice, I definitely would have farmed this out. You know, I love my kids, but there is something absolutely terrifying about putting a 16-year-old in a number one, my vehicle that I'm paying for. And there was one instance where we were trying to teach one of my daughters how to drive, and it was one of those things where when you pull up to the light, the road shifts by about 20 feet to the left, and you kind of have to cross the intersection at a diagonal. And we just told her, she's like, well, what do I do? I was like, well, you just keep going straight. She's like, well, if I go straight, I'm not gonna hit the road. It's like, just follow the lines in the road, honey. Just follow the lines in the road.
I got to tell you, I was not a great driver when I was that age.
Who was?
I was afraid of I should have been more afraid than I was, and I am surprised that my driving teacher did not wet his pants. I mean, quite seriously. High-end, the reason I got into computers is because I had like an eye-hand coordination issue. That's why my parents got me into computers. That's so funny.
If it makes you feel any better, I wasn't really all that good at sports either.
Yeah, no. Hey, I think a lot of our guests on the show can say that. When I was 8, instead of playing soccer with my friends, I was learning to code C++. So, there's definitely something wrong with us. I'll admit to that.
I think there's something wrong with all of them.
I appreciate that.
I was going to say, how many of them made, the World Cup or FIFA or the NBA or the NFL or the NBA, baseball? I don't even know what they are.
Whatever.
But how many of us that were learning how to code actually wound up with good jobs in the end? So I think we were the smart ones.
You know what? That movie, which I'm sure you're thinking about now, what was it? The Revenge of the Nerds or something? That was such a pivotal. I can't remember if that's the exact name.
That's Revenge of the Nerds.
That was such a pivotal moment in my life. It's like, oh, maybe it's okay to be a full-on nerd geek kind of thing.
Hey, I think they just couldn't understand. They didn't have enough imagination for Dungeons and Dragons. That was their problem.
Did you play?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, still
do.
Really? So I was a dungeon master. I actually wrote a post about why being a dungeon master is such a wonderful thing when it comes to storytelling, imagination, how much hard work it is to bloody create those.
It is. And the one thing that I remember, I'm going to be 50 in like 2 weeks. So I've been around for a while. And I remember in the beginning, it was like, oh, all that's going to lead you down this terrible path, and you're going to be worshiping the devil and all this other stuff. And it's like, no, what it did is it gave me an imagination, and it let me be able to visualize things in my head. And I don't need a screen in front of me to actually tell a story in my own mind.
Yes. I mean, people forget that there was a little bit of of a fight around fantasy. Like 40 years before, Elvis was not welcomed with open arms, right? It was
not
devil
at
worship.
All.
It's these small things in history that we kind of take for granted nowadays. I appreciate that.
And the funny thing was, if that was devil worshiping, the fact that I've got a credit card in my hand, now I'm being called out on extremist websites for having the mark of the beast. So it's just a label I haven't been able to get away from.
I appreciate that. So this is so delightful, and I appreciate you coming on the show. What made you write a book? I mean, it's such a difficult labor of love.
Well, the book was actually kind of a
You know, hold on.
creation out of my
Let's do a
life.
name drop here so everybody can
Sure.
go and get the book. Because personal, Ari's stamp of approval. Human
So
Hacked.
the name of the book is called Human Hacked: My Life and Lessons as the World's First Augmented Ethical Hacker. So essentially what that means to the layman is I am what is known as a transhuman or a grinder. So I am a human being that has augmented my body by adding 10 different subdermal implantable microchips within my arms and from between my elbows and my fingertips. And I can literally hack certain people and certain devices through physical contact. I have magnets in my fingers that I can use to trace electrical wiring. It's actually granted me an additional sense. I use subdermal implants to enhance my security online through a tool called the VivoKey Apex. This is where I get my one-time passwords. It'll do HMAC SHA-1, PGP, all different kinds of encryptions. And you can even put your Tesla key card on it, and so that way you don't have to worry about your keys and you can just get in your car and drive. So I am a little bit different than most cybersecurity professionals in the fact that I've actually integrated my body with the technology that I'm planning to use in order to attack people.
So there's something incredibly interesting about this, sixth sense. Tell us more about this.
So what I've done is I have placed a magnet in the tip of my left pinky. And the amount of nerve endings that are bundled at the tips of your fingers, once it heals, any movement will actually produce a nerve sensation. The closest thing I could compare it to would be kind of like spidey sense. So if I get anywhere near an electromagnetic field, electromagnetic current, even poorly shielded electrical wiring inside of a house, I get a tingling sensation in the tip of my finger, and the closer I get to that source, the stronger it gets. So I can actually feel the invisible currents and things that are around us every day. So it's been an amazing addition to the human condition as far as I'm concerned. But it does have a couple of drawbacks when you got some really interesting friends like I do. I grew up on the west side of Detroit. It's a kind of a rough place to grow up, and I'm not afraid of being shot at. I'm not afraid of people pulling knives on me. I am afraid of earth magnets.
What is that?
Those really strong, powerful little magnets that you can get. I have friends who like to run around and chase me with magnets.
Oh my God. It makes you rethink the definition of friend at that moment, I would say.
Well, they're my friends. I mean, I do pranks on them as well. They just nowhere near as painful.
Fair
I mean,
enough.
because when you think about it, if it snaps on, you're being pinched from the inside and the outside of your skin at the same time. It's a lot different than what most people have ever experienced.
Absolutely.
But you asked why, and that's the question I get a lot of the time. I've been breaking into computers for decades. I credit my first hack to a Commodore 64. My first network-based hack was done on an isolated token ring network. So I've been doing this stuff for a really long time. And I spent most of my life as an active criminal. I was in the motorcycle clubs for the better part of my life. And it wasn't until I was given one of my first granddaughters that I realized that I needed to make some changes in my life, the choices I was making in the direction I wanted my life to go, or else to steal a line from AA. The only opportunities I was going to get to really spend any time with my grandchildren was going to be either from behind bars, an institution, or at a gravesite. So I actually made the choice to walk away from everything about my life. I gave up riding in the clubs. I decided I wasn't going to be a black hat anymore. And I tried to just be the same type of security professional that anybody else would be. And I think it was just through circumstance and fate that my past and all of the activities I was doing when I was acting as a criminal came back to be able to give me a future that I could have never imagined as a protector.
I appreciate that. I want to ask you a question about hacking today. I
Sure.
mean, on the one hand, reverse engineering of patches, there's a certain laziness to it. But on the other hand, understanding, protocols, you mentioned token ring, like really understanding a protocol, looking at how it works and trying to find vulnerabilities is so hard.
Not
What is
anymore.
the, Tell
Not
us more
anymore.
about that. What does the landscape look like?
To be honest, I get a lot of people who ask me, I want to get into cybersecurity. What should I study? I want to get into cybersecurity. What classes should I take? And honestly, for about the last year and a half, I've been telling them to take English and composition classes.
Oh, that's surprising. Why?
Because people like me, who've been doing this forever, and we have the history. I started in OS2 Warp and DOS. We don't have these individuals out there anymore. And the truth is, with the current landscape and the tools that are available, there's no need. A lot of it's going to LLMs and AI. I mean, they're within the last week or so, Google has two different AIs. One of them was actually able to find the first 0 day in SQLite by doing code analysis.
Oh,
And
wow.
they have another tool that is a fuzzer that is able to work at infinitely exponential degrees better than a human being. So I really don't see the future of offensive security being people like myself. I see it more as individuals who will probably be leveraging some type of an AI or a large language model to actually do the exploitation, code creation, possibly even to up to automating the actual attacks. Have you ever heard of the LLM White Rabbit Neo, for example?
No.
This is an LLM whose sole purpose is to act as an assistance for offensive security professionals. And just as a test, I went out there and I went to VulnDB, which, if you're not familiar with, or your listeners aren't, this is where most of your new exploits are first, put up for the world to see. Doesn't mean that there's exploit code, but it's like, hey, we discovered a remote code execution. We were, whatever it is. And I went out there and just said, what is a new CVE that nobody's done anything with? Went into White Rabbit Neo and said, make me proof of concept code for this new thing. It went out to VulnDB, pulled the vulnerability in, analyzed what it was, and threw out Python code. I mean, it didn't work right off the bat, but what it did do was give me a starting foundation and a framework to build off of without having to do months and months of research.
I didn't believe that this worked, and just this concept of asking, ChatGPT or whatnot to write code until I tried it out. And I am a serious coder, right back into the 20, 30 years ago. Sure, you need to tweak it, but you look at the code and like, oh my God, this has saved me hours of looking at APIs, hours of reading documentation, hours of figuring out the ins and outs. And now I can just have a look at the structure and say like, okay, I need to tweak this a little bit. It's mind-boggling. I did not expect this. I did not think that this would happen. In fact, if you would have asked me if AI is a real thing, I would have told you, no, this is just sophisticated neural networks. This is all bullshit. And then ChatGPT happened and I had to eat my hat, right? I had to say, no, something in the world has changed. And it just took off in a way that, quite honestly, is scary. It scares the shit out of me on what people can do on social engineering today.
Yeah, I think it should scare the shit out of everybody. I mean, especially when we've got the AI-enabled phishing, which is actually going out, figuring out who your CFO is, maybe your CTO, figures out how.
Have you seen it do personalization yet? I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, yeah.
Crap.
It's basically it'll go out and it'll search all of your social media posts, figure out your writing style, and then it can basically act and speak as if it was that individual.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is coming, but I haven't been exposed
it's
to
not
it.
coming, it's here.
Oh my Lord.
And you heard about the deep fake phishing that happened in Hong Kong about 4 months ago.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of my personal, you know, things that I'm up on the soapbox preaching about, is the fact that we are now in a position in time here within this world that we can't believe what we see and what we hear anymore. And with the fact that biometrics, in my opinion, are one of the worst choices for an authentication method that you could ever use, if for no other reason.
Talk more about that. Why is that? What's your perspective?
Well, for starters, when you register a biometric with a device, it's not taking a snapshot of your face. It's not remembering your thumbprint. It's mapping out specific landmarks, and then it's doing a comparison when you go to authenticate. But what people don't realize is after you register, that data is written down to a very specific file called a biometric template, which is stored in a secured location on the device in memory, but that is not untouchable. I mean, iOS actually had some malware that was running around a couple of months back that was actually biometric stealing malware. And the problem with any type of biometric template is once it's compromised, this isn't like a password that you can rotate.
Yes,
you cannot change your face. You cannot rotate your thumb or your fingerprints. So I don't personally believe that we should be using these in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it was the Chaos Computer Club out of Germany, and I can get you the exact date, but they actually were able to compromise the German defense minister. I believe her name was Ursula von der Hoven. And if you notice, you don't see a lot of politicians talking with their hands up in the air anymore, because they were actually able to lift fingerprints off of high resolution digital photos. So anything that would be considered open and public domain, in my opinion, is not something that we should be using as an authentication method.
I mean, when you just look at that from that perspective, that it actually, your face is just a password. It's open to everybody to see it. And however you encode your face, really, that's where the secret is.
Correct.
There's nothing secret except in the encryption. So it just becomes well, how did you do that? What's the algorithm look like? That's all.
And I can simplify this even easier. You know, when it comes to what we are legally given protections for here within the United States, it's passwords and passphrases. Right. Your voice is not considered protected. Your face and your image is not considered protected. That's why we've heard of cases here within the U.S.
You're from the PII perspective, or from what perspective?
No, from a legal challenge. From a legal challenge. So let's take a look at, you know, some, and I'm not trying to say that this is a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way the law works. You know, there were quite a few people who had committed terroristic type acts that had iPhones, if you recall.
Yeah.
And, you know, the governments were trying to get Apple to break into the encryption, break into these phones, and they were like, we can't do it.
Right.
So take those same situations. The only reason they were able to do that.
That's bullshit, by the way.
Oh, I know that, and so do you. I mean,
well, I developed that hardware that they actually had and didn't use. I worked for Celebrite.
There you go.
I was the product manager. I hired those hackers. I was the person who, you know, 4 weeks, months after they came, like, oh, we used this company. It's called Celebrite. I was employee number 13.
Nice.
So, you know, anyway, I didn't want to go into that story, but that's complete bullshit, that whole story.
Oh, yeah. Anyone who is a manufacturer of a product, they have a way to get back in. Yeah. Guaranteed.
100%.
But if you take that same situation and remove the password aspect, and if it was just a facial recognition, there have been many cases that have been documented here within the United States where some type of an authority has just walked us up to somebody while they were in the cell, held the phone up, opened it up.
Yeah.
You know, it's this, if it's considered public domain, it's very difficult to try and double it as a authentication method, especially if anybody in the world can actually take your picture. I mean, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot lately out in the wild is the use of deep fakes to try and bypass facial recognition, because it'll give you the voice, it has liveliness. So yeah, I'm just not a fan of biometrics. I would prefer to see some type of PKI, a YubiKey, something along those natures, in addition to a password. But that's just my preference.
Yeah. If I had to be the king of the world for a day, I would make it legally mandatory that every single person in the world use these, and that every single software in the world basically supported hardware tokens. And it's not, this is not a fingerprint reader what we see here. It's just attached to turn it on, so it's not on all the time. It's basically opening that gate to give that authentication. I mean, if we just had that, I feel like it would make life so much more difficult. It wouldn't solve the problem for sure, but it would be such a different world. What frustrates me is that it's taken a while for companies to even support physical tokens, including Amazon, which they have issues around that, where it's not as easy to use it for their GovCloud solutions. So it's like, what's happening?
No, it's not. It costs money.
Yeah.
And the sad part is when we look at a lot of things in regards to compliance, companies are typically not doing the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yeah.
They're doing the right thing just to make sure that they meet some type of auditory requirement.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really sad, because at the end of the day, we are the consumer. If we're going to buy from these companies, I would like to have a much greater feeling of that they, as my provider, are looking at my data that I'm giving them as something that's valuable and needs to be protected.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's more along the lines of it's easier to pay out than to fix the problem.
I was livid when I figured out this kind of truth in the industry that it turns out people know, but basically compliance is zero. It gives you zero security.
None.
Like, there's no connection between compliance and security. And unfortunately, I was the person who fired this consultant. Basically, these consultants are so good that they will do whatever they need to have the discussion with the auditor, create the evidence that they need. That you have this exchange between the consultant and the auditor, and you get SOC 2, ISO 27001, whatever. And did anything change in your security posture? Nope.
No.
Absolutely.
Because that's not the intention. The intention is to pass the audit so that way they can continue to make money.
That's right. And really, most of CIOs, CSOs, CXOs, whatever they look at compliance, it's really a sales enabler. This is what you need. And in order for your customer to say sure, and it doesn't even save you these security questionnaires. I've answered between 100 and 300. And a friend of mine told me 1,000 questions as a security questionnaire. Thank God I didn't need to do that. Never seen that. But oh my God. Here's my point, right? I think that compliance is level 0.
It is. That's to me, compliance is kind of the bare minimum in order to be able to get some type of cybersecurity insurance. It's essentially, if you want, these are the bare minimums to be able to work in this space.
Yes.
And it's the companies that will take that as a starting point and build from it that I think are doing the right thing, and their minds are in the right location. Yeah. But unfortunately, when it comes to, especially here within the United States, being a capitalistic society and a profit-driven system, it's more they're more beholden to their shareholders Absolutely. Than they are their actual clients.
And this is the legal requirement, right? Legal requirement of you as an officer of the company is to maximize shareholder value. That's it. Yep. There's no legal requirement for being ethical.
No,
you can't break the law, but you don't need to be ethical.
And you don't need to be moral either.
Absolutely not.
It's
ridiculous, right?
And to be honest, that's one of the things that I've been bringing up a lot lately, is the fact that I feel like as a society, we have really lost the anger that we should have in regards to our information leaking.
Yes.
I mean, I did a survey at one of my last presentations where it was like, how many people here have gotten one of those letters from a company that says, we're sorry, your information has been leaked. We're going to give you a year's worth of free credit monitoring. and I
I
remember
think I have 10 of those. It's
but
ridiculous.
do you remember the first one?
Oh
Because
my God.
that was the
Yes.
point. I remember the first one of those I
Yes.
got. I was furious.
Yes.
I was fit to be tied. I was ranting and raving and screaming.
Yes. Yes.
And now it's just become part of doing business here
Yeah.
in the United States. And I think we've all become almost numb to it and apathetic. Whereas it used to be, you'd have some type of I don't want to say social ramification, but
Yeah.
there was always this big negative hit into the company, either for
Yeah.
their reputation, whether it was their branding. But now it's almost like, oh, yep, this is just part of
Yeah.
doing business in today's modern society. And I think that's a mindset that we as the customers need to start really pushing back on and fighting this narrative that this is acceptable.
Absolutely. I mean, we kind of had Enron, and that was kind of outrageous. But then we've been slowly being desensitized. And it's
Absolutely.
like, okay, this is a thing, it happens. I'm to the level that I'm like, okay, I'm going to put PIN codes on my SSNs. Like, by the way, everybody should know this. You can put a password on your social security number,
Absolutely. You can
basically.
lock it down and
There's free, it's actually they try to sell you it, but there's a free way to lock your, they call it a freeze as opposed to their paid service. You can freeze your social security, your credit score. You can put a password on your social security number. I don't know, maybe I'm just overzealous, but once a
nope.
year.
I think you're right where you need to be, man.
But this is not common, right? I mean, compared to, but once a year I call up the company, the credit card company. I say, oh, I lost my credit card. It's not true, I have it. I just tell them I want a new credit card number once a year.
Oh, have you seen what's going on down in Latin America with the credit
oh,
cards? And
oh my Lord.
they're using numberless credit cards there.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
love that, by the way, that you can, PayPal does this to a certain degree, right? I
yeah.
think that's an undersold value of PayPal, that they don't kind of explain how they work from that perspective. And then your ability to create virtual credit cards if you're doing something dodgy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who was the company. They have like a black logo. You can basically create on the spot a new virtual number and basically use it for
Yeah.
shit. Or have 3 virtual numbers and kind of say, okay,
Yep.
I'm
And
going to use this one.
if you're gonna do like an auto pay every month, you can set up one specific
Yeah.
number for, say, your electric bill, and if anything but that company tries to use it, it'll be denied. I've seen this starting to make its way into the US market, but they're actually selling this as a premium feature to a card,
That is
which makes no
delightful.
sense.
Well,
This
it's
this
the
could be the
technique.
potential
Yeah.
this could be the potential end of credit card fraud.
The technique there, the fact that they're selling it, I agree with you, but the technique there is delightful. I mean, that concept that here's your trusted transactions and here's your untrusted transactions, and you should not have a repeating, whatever on a untrusted transaction credit card. That is absolutely delightful. I love that technique. Is this commercialized? Where is this? Europe, they're usually ahead of us. Where is this happening?
Actually, I've seen it more in Latin America.
Oh,
I've seen
really?
it all over South America. I've seen it a little bit in Europe, but I'm just looking at it more from, if I was the credit card, company, why wouldn't I want this all the way around, just to stop the credit card fraud and the potential having to repay all of these fraudulent charges?
Yeah.
Doesn't make
Well,
sense to me. But
Well, when
that's
you look at incentive design and how the credit card companies work with the insurance companies, and how it's specifically in the US as opposed to Europe, how the individual consumers are actually not impacted due to the insurance, it kind of becomes this issue in incentive design and misalignment. But we're going way too deep. We're going way too deep
Well, you
on
said
this.
rabbit holes.
Yeah, that's true. Here's my personal pet peeve, right? You can pay for LinkedIn to authenticate your identity. We have know your customer, know your consumer requirements. If you kind of think about an expansion, and this goes into 1984 George Orwell kind of rabbit holes where, well, should we really do this? But my point is, if you calculate the sum of evil in human trafficking, in pedophilia, in all these awful things, Know Your Consumer Act, this future hypothetical Know Your Consumer Act, in social media would completely change the landscape. It would also bring us into our Orwellian, domain, which is kind of scary.
We're already there.
Yes, 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 absolutely. So do we? I don't know. I fight myself with this. I'm like, should we take another step towards 1984, but make it so much difficult for pedophiles and human trafficking, or is this a line we shouldn't cross?
I don't think
there's no right answers here. I don't know what the answer is.
I'm not gonna say that I think that any type of abuse should be tolerated anywhere. But what I would say is I don't think there's a way to stop it.
Yeah.
So I mean, even if we try and lock down certain channels, the one thing that we've discovered is the criminal element will always find a way.
Yeah, it's an arms race.
It is. We're in the largest arms race that the world has ever seen. The only difference is it's not being done with weapons and missiles and tanks. It's all being done on a cyber battlefield that no one can physically see.
Yeah. And the US government just caught up to this relatively recently. There is one basically modem, right, communication chip in the world that half of us are using, and it's manufactured by one manufacturer in China. I'm oversimplifying, but so the US government basically caught up to this.
We're not going to say the name.
You can Google it. But so the US government basically caught up to this, and they're like, oh, if you're a government contractor in some way or another, or you're in this category of protected goods, you can't use these chips. So there's a list now of what is it, like 70 now or something like that you should not use. So now all these manufacturers are like, holy shit, we need to redesign our boards, right? And this is recent.
Yeah, but you know what? That to me, that's just kind of taking it to the governmental level of what we're seeing more in a grassroots efforts with S-bombs.
Yeah. Well, talk us through this, right? Just bring our audience with.
One of the newest things that we've been seeing out in the wild are what are called SBOMs or S-bombs, which is a software bill of materials. Yeah. Up until now, when it comes to doing
what a bill of materials really is, it's all of the things that goes into building something. Now, this can be a physical bomb if you're building a phone, or it's every single electronic component that makes up your, because a manufacturer doesn't manufacture everything in there. They buy a whole bunch of things, they put it on a printed circuit board, which is that old green thing. They're not always green. Or S-bomb. What is S-bomb? I can't show you software. But S-bomb is software, right?
Software. To Ari's point, there are hundreds and hundreds of libraries that can be used in order to create functionality within an application. And a lot of these libraries are open source and they're free for anyone to use. But therein also means that these have their own potential supply chain attack style attack vectors.
That's right.
So let's say I'm using, G++ as my compiler.
Yeah.
This is an open source tool. If somebody gets into the open source tool and says every package that's compiled, put this line of code in, and it makes it through that particular code check, everything that particular G++ could be pushed down to the hundreds of thousands of machines. And every single application that's built utilizing that could potentially have that same line of attack code in it. Yeah. And it's only been within the last 2 to 3 years that we've really started seeing people looking for accountability in the libraries and the coding techniques and the softwares that are being utilized to build the applications that are running our world.
So this was almost exactly 3 years ago. There was a massive S-bomb attack. It affected everyone, including myself. And there wasn't even a fix right away. Like, we had to wait for the library to get it done. And then why this is so complicated is because when you need to update your code, test it, release a new version, if APIs change or the signatures, quote unquote, like, it's not easy to replace dependency libraries in your code. That can be days or weeks of work. In the best case.
And if I can throw one point in there, when most end users think about updating an application, they're thinking about like a Windows update where everything's already packaged for you. Yeah. And that's not what we're talking about here by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to bring this to kind of being crystal clear for everyone, you think about it as you've got thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lines of code. and you've got this, maybe 1,000 lines of code that you need to go and update, right? And it's not as simple as replace all.
No.
It's a problem. It really is a problem. And the thing is that it's not your code, it's somebody else's code that you're using to accelerate your development. So you don't even know how it works. You can't scan that code. Many times you don't have access to it. Sometimes you do. It's a really interesting problem. Len, I wanna ask you a difficult question, and everybody answers this from their own personal experience and bias, so it's okay. There's no right answers here. What do you think for security officers right now? What is the biggest top 3 threats that they need to be thinking about?
Ooh, I'm a firm believer that I think we're going to start seeing a much reduced short time between discovery of exploit and proof of concept and usable attack code. So I don't think that anybody who's in a managerial position around cyber is really prepared for what I'm going to see as the elevation of the speed of attack that we're going to start seeing over the course of 2025.
Right. And really what this is, it's automation of
absolutely
disassembling patches into attacks is really what we're talking about in one aspect of it.
That's one aspect. I think that one of my big predictions for 2025 is I think we're going to see our first AI-based APT over the course of the next year.
Just explain that. Take out the acronyms.
APT in our world stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. So this would be potentially your nation state attackers, groups coming out of China, Iran, Russia. Currently, most of these individuals are acting as groups that are supported by these governments. Well, with the advent of new AI, LLM technology, automation that can all be combined, I'm betting that we're going to be seeing some of these adversarial nations developing full autonomous AI whose only sole purpose is to weaponize cyber attack. So the ability to need a human behind those attacks, I think, is going to go away over the course of this next year.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing.
And just to bring our audience with us, because I don't think it's a commonly known fact that cyber attack technologies have been productized and popularized and democratized. So you can go and buy, cyber attack technologies. They have a support number.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you can actually do ransomware as a service now to the point, just like you could up on AWS. Yep. There's an entirely offensive cloud out there that's based out of the darknet. But I think nobody is really prepared for the speed at which the evolution of attacks are going to happen over 2025. I also think that we're going to see a lot of repatriation. So basically detransitioning from cloud-based services. I really do believe that the cloud bubble has finally started to burst. We've seen massive increases for costs for data at rest, compute, and I see a lot more companies bringing historical archival data back on site. And I think we're going to see the idea of a strictly cloud environment go the way of the dodo, and we're going to move predominantly into hybrid models where only cloud native services will be remaining in the cloud.
That's so interesting. Archival data, I get it, right? But what about do you think people are going to start, getting their own server farms? Just, companies running SaaS stuff?
I really don't think it's going to be so much server farms, but I think it's going to be more along the lines of a lot of NAS or SAN storage locally working through some type of federation to whichever cloud platform that they're using. I don't see a lot of Azure AD going away, but I think we're going to see a lot more on-prem for anything that is no longer cloud native, Kubernetes, OpenShift, Docker, things of that nature. But I think we're going to start seeing more and more legacy style applications that are still in use being brought back on-prem just to deal with the advancement in the cost of running in the cloud.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's terrifying if Git gets hacked, right? It's those kind of things.
Let's be honest. I think the cloud is another one of those things that it has great potential, but unfortunately, nobody understands IAM the same way they do Windows or standard Linux-based permissions, and that's why we're not hearing a ton about cloud being hacked as much as it's leaks or breaches. And most of that's due to misconfiguration of IAM roles or cloud-based permissions.
Right. I appreciate that. Len, I'm looking at the time. We should have been done 5 minutes ago. This has been so much fun that we just completely lost track of time. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I mean, and we didn't even really get into the fact that I can break into your devices through physical contact.
Oh my God. Yeah, but this idea of, you connect the USB, or you even give a USB cable or your charger, oh, hey, use my charger, and that's it, you're done, you're hacked.
Well, I know we're short on time, but let me give you something else to think about. And I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah. Yeah, I see.
That is a NFC RFID chip. And if you actually put your phone in my hand, I don't need to plug in a USB. I can actually trigger the NFC and actually compromise you through that. And one of the things that I love asking people, because I think this really forces people to kind of reevaluate the way they see things, is I'm sure at some point in time, Ari, we're going to meet up in person just because we both travel in the same circles. If I was to just say, walk up to you out of the blue and go, will you hand me your wallet and let me go through it? You would probably you're out of your mind, Len. What are you thinking? But at the same time, if you didn't know I had these implants and I walked up and said, hey, Ari, let me see your phone for a second, man, I got this video I want to show you.
Yeah.
There's more than a 50-50 chance that you'll hand it over.
Yeah.
And if we look at the amount of personally identifiable information that's contained within wallets and purses compared to what's in those cellular devices, it's not even comparable. So if nothing else, I'm hoping that through my exposure of being a transhuman with the implanted microchip technology and the fact that I can actually compromise through physical contact, I'm hoping people will start to reevaluate the security by which they look at their mobile devices.
Absolutely. Len, thank you so much for joining the program today. You know what? We're going to have you back. This has been such a delight. There's so many topics that we didn't touch upon. So
hey,
I really appreciate
I'd be happy to come back anytime, man. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I had a great time and a great conversation.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.